G'day everyone, it's Jimmy here from Mitch's on the Horizon. I thought I would try something different today. So I thought why not jump on a live and let's do a watch together. Let's watch a video together. So the way this will work is if you one sec, let me plug this back in. All right. G'day, guys. It's Jimmy here from Mitch's on the Horizon. I thought I would try something a little bit different today. So we're going to do a watch party. If there's anything you guys want me to watch or react to, leave it in the comments and we'll just do this until I have a few things popped up this afternoon, but I thought I got a little bit of time here. So why not share my thoughts on things? There's one video in particular I want to watch today. That is this video here, which is which has been released by Moon. He literally just released it a few hours ago on Australia's demise, so unexpected demise. So we're going to watch that together. But in the meantime, if there's any other videos or anything you have you want me to sort of watch or are interested in learning my thoughts on, leave it in the comments. If you want to talk about traveling, if you want to talk about where we are here in Penang, whatever, just have a chat. You can chat. And I can see the chats pop up here. And yeah, let's get into it. So the video I want to watch today personally is this video right here, which is done by a guy named Moon. Moon's quite a popular YouTuber. And this popped up in my feed and I was like, oh, fantastic. I really need to watch this video and sort of react to it. And I thought, why not do it right here? I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. If you have any thoughts, just leave them in the chat. Make sure to like this live stream. And if you guys enjoy it, we'll do it more often. So if there's anything you want me to react to, an article, a video, anything like that, just leave it in the comments and we'll react to it. But let's start this video and have a watch.
Australia should have been insulated from the world's economic collapse. It's a developed nation, the second richest in the world by median wealth, with a whole continent of resources at its fingertips. But instead, the whole country seems to be on a knife's edge. Despite their insane levels of wealth, millions of Australians can't even afford to feed their own families.
More than 50,000 Victorians are needing a free weekly grocery shop to feed their families. Food donations are surging as the cost of living crisis worsens.
So how is it even possible that things could get this bad in Australia?
Yeah, I've got my thoughts. Obviously, I share that quite often. I think it's just a collective ignorance in the country that causes this. It's a collective ignorance of she'll be right. And it's something that's snuck up on the country over a very long period of time. You know, the country's wealth is of the everyday person in Australia slowly being decreasing over time. And it's very easy for us to be boiled slowly, if that makes sense. You know, the pot's been boiling slowly for a long period of time. You know, we as frogs haven't jumped out, as they say, and that's how it's gotten as bad as it has. But let's see what else Moon has to say.
Well, like almost any country, Australia's fortunes have been almost entirely dependent on its geography. Look down at the country from space and you can begin to see what's going on. Nearly everyone in Australia lives in a very small part of the country. Most people live in just a few cities, all dotted around the coast. The interior, on the other hand, is almost uninhabitable. While it makes up 70% of the total land, it's only home to 5% of the population. It's a unique situation that's created some very unique problems. There are thousands and thousands of miles between some cities. They're separated by land that's assaulted by intense heat, droughts, wildfires, and tropical storms. Infrastructure in these rural areas is almost non-existent. It's just too expensive to build and maintain. And yet,
well, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that statement. I don't think it's there's no infrastructure in the regions. I think it's just the government, the state governments, I should say, spend the money where the population is, right? So if the most densely populated areas are the capital cities, obviously, and then the little regional centers, little towns with 1,000 people, they struggle, they suffer because the infrastructure. When you've got to build a hospital for 500 people, you can't utilize it efficiently. So I don't know if that's necessarily true, but let's keep going.
Despite these problems, in lots of ways, Australia's unique geography has been more of a blessing than a curse. A massive supply of untapped natural resources has given the country an easy route to prosperity compared to other nations. The mining industry is the biggest industry in the country, making up over $450 billion in revenue in 2024, or 14.3% of the country's GDP. Most of these resources are exported to Australia's trading partners in East Asia. With the rise of China's economy and manufacturing in the region in general, it's hard to see how Australia isn't set for at least the next few decades, as Asia will only need more and more resources, and
that's a super interesting point that Moon just brought up. How Australia is set for the next few decades. This is something that seems to really upset people when I bring it up, is that when 14, as it's saying here, 14% of our GDP comes from mining and it all goes pretty much to one region, that creates a geographical risk. And there's a lot of people out there that just don't want to admit that Australia has this key risk factor, which is that a big part of our GDP goes to one place and goes to one country, mainly in that place. Yeah, parts and pieces go to Malaysia and Indonesia and Thailand and things, but by far most of our primary resources, whether it's grain, whether it's iron ore, whether it's coal, whether it's fish, whether it's crayfish, they all go to freaking China. And when China sneezes, we get a full-blown cold.
We'll need to buy them somewhere. But unfortunately, it isn't all that simple. In fact, economies based on resource extraction often belong to the least developed, most unstable nations in the world. Just look at the DRC, one of the biggest mining economies in the entire globe. And yet right now, they're being invaded by one of their neighbors who have coincidentally taken control of the richest mines in the country. And Western media just doesn't report on this because we're allied with the country doing the invading this time. And we all need that metal to make some more iPhones and Teslas. The question is, how did Australia avoid this fate? Being an island helps, of course, but that wasn't the whole story. You see, when the British Empire was deciding where to ship its criminals in the early 1800s, it seems strange that they decided on Australia of all places. It's almost literally on the other side of the world for one thing, meaning each round trip could take years longer. They weren't short of places in the world to choose from either, considering they own about a quarter of it, but there was a very good reason behind why they chose to make such a massive detour. In their Nobel Prize winning study, 3 researchers identified the answer to this question, revealing why Australia became a developed nation in the first place: tropical diseases. Back in the day, nearly everyone who went to colonize Africa, the Caribbean, or other British colonies would die from disease. Europeans simply weren't adapted to live in these places, and they paid the price for this. An average of 70% of the colonists arriving in Sierra Leone would die in just the first year. But in countries like America or Australia, these diseases weren't nearly as common or as deadly, which meant that these colonies could become home to much larger, permanent populations of Europeans almost immediately. This changed everything for the future of these countries. If new colonists died quickly, then the place wouldn't be seen as a new home. Instead, their economies were set up to funnel wealth out of the country as possible, with as few colonists present as possible. Places like Australia, on the other hand, were seen differently. Europeans could comfortably live there, so far more ended up settling there. These economies were still designed to benefit the European nation that owned them, but some of the wealth was kept by the colonists. So why all this history lesson?
Well, that's a super interesting take. I've never really heard anyone talk about it like that, but it makes a lot of sense, right? You think about it, in the 1700s, there was no treatment for malaria. There was no treatment for yellow fever and things like that. So it does make sense that they would be wanting to live in countries where that's less of an issue. Very interesting take, especially about the fact that like countries like Sierra Leone, they were just there to take as much as they could and get out of there as quick as possible, like a speed run. Whereas in Australia, there was less, people got here and went, oh, actually we might stay. That's super interesting.
Well, the point of all of this is that once Australia got its independence, they should have been well positioned to keep all of their resource wealth for themselves. For a long time they did, but it was a chain of more recent greedy decisions that have landed millions of Australians in the breadlines. For decades and decades, especially after the Second World War, Australia's economic planners had a pretty simple strategy that they could follow to get richer. All they had to do was take the money already being made from mining and resource extraction and invest it back into the country. Of course, when we say country, we really simply mean land, either rural land for more mining or coastal land near the cities for residential property. As we mentioned, despite having so much land, nearly all Australians live in a few big cities on the coast, and this created a hotly contested residential market. For decades, real estate was a safe net because the prices went up every year. By the 1960s, lots of Australians were absolutely rolling in it, and that money went straight into the housing market. Like almost all developed nations, homeownership became the end goal of most people's lives. And in 1966, 73% of homes were owned by the people who lived in them. And this became the bedrock of the new Australian dream. Most jobs would pay well enough to afford a house, and because house prices were relatively cheap, there was a clear link between hard work and getting a foothold in society. The contrast with modern Australia is really stunning. The reason for this is that Australian housing markets across large cities have deteriorated drastically in just the past few years. The Demographia International Housing Affordability is a report that measures most large cities in the world and how affordable they are to buy property in. Each city is given a rating according to house prices and how they match up with a middle class income. To set the scene, Australia's housing market is so bad that they chose Sydney as the picture for the front cover. Anything under 3 is considered affordable, and a rating above 9 is impossible. A housing market where the average middle class family can't afford to buy a home without major financial assistance. And yet only 2 of Australia's large 5 housing markets ranked under this level. And Sydney was by far the worst of the 5, coming in at 13.
All right, guys. So that's super telling, right? Like that's super telling. I see this a lot in the comments. I got a comment the other day from someone that said, "Oh, I did my backstory," and they said, "Oh, well, if you just didn't travel and it said saved up for a home when you were in 2009, when you had the opportunity to buy, you wouldn't be in this situation." And it's like, okay, in retrospect, you can say that, and you can say that maybe we made the wrong choices, but you can see why there's a lot of people under the age of 35 that just say they can't get into the housing market when the unaffordability of the housing market is the worst it's ever been, firstly. And secondly, it's one of the most expensive places on the planet to buy a home. You only feel stability in a country when you have somewhere that you live that can't be taken from you, right? And there's a lot of people out there that's not even an option for them anymore. And the inherent instability creates a whole bunch of anxiety, and that anxiety sort of flows on into the market. So let's keep watching because it's getting very interesting now.
Over 2023 in Sydney, rents rose by over 15% on average, and they were already unaffordable. Demands are so high that viewings are attended by dozens of people, and even the most rundown studio flat gets offers above its asking price.
An inquiry has found Sydney has the 3rd least affordable housing market in the world. It warns Australia could become a 2-class society if home ownership doesn't increase.
A generation ago,
could be or is. I would argue that Australia is a 2-class economy as it is. And I know there's people that don't like me saying the landlord class and the renter class, because there is a lot of landlords out there that are just struggling just as much as everyone else. But really, it is a 2-class system. You have all the people that have property who have been building wealth with property over a long period of time. Then there's the middle bit. The middle class, I would argue, is people that own property that maybe have just got into the market and are building their wealth that way. And then you have everyone else. In Australia, that's what it's like. And you can argue with the point in that. But if you go to the street and ask an everyday Australian where they think that what is the best way to wealth, I reckon 80 out of 100 people would say property. And that's pretty telling, because it is. If you happen to have bought a property in the 70s, and the property prices have become the 3rd most unaffordable in the world, you're home and host. You're sweet. If you're one of the people that's paying the 3rd most expensive property prices in the world right now, you're stuffed. It is what it is. Sydney's effed. Sydney is, I don't know how anyone lives in Sydney. I lived there when I was in the Navy, but I was on a warship, and it was bad back then. And imagine what it's like now. I think most people just live so far out from the city and from where they work that, they lose 2 hours a day to driving and things like that. It's just the status quo.
People in their 20s were expected to be buying a home and starting a family, and now 30-year-olds are considered lucky if they don't move back in with their parents or go homeless. It's truly insane that this could ever happen to such a rich country. In many ways, the causes of this housing disaster are the same as the ones we see in many other developed countries. And migration has been killer in pushing the demand for homes up. Despite Australia's relatively low population, they've accepted a relatively large amount of people in. Between 2022 and 2023, over 500,000 people moved into the country. In the decade before, other than a dip during the pandemic, net migration was around 200,000 every single year. More people need more homes, and new immigrants are much more likely to rent rather than buy. And yet all of this has been covered up by the media and government for fear of completely losing grip on their power over the country that's making the lives of Australians harder every single day. But you know what else is being covered up? The insane benefits of cocoa flour.
Oh, okay, we're into an ad, but this brings up a really good point. A lot of Australians forget we need immigration. If we don't have immigration in Australia, Australia as a country ceases to exist. We don't have a population big enough to support itself. Right. And quite frankly, there's a lot of Aussies that can't be asked doing the jobs that immigrants are willing to do. That's the other part of it too. But do we need 500,000 immigrants? No. The reason immigration is so aggressive right now is because we have no manufacturing. I've spoken about this before in other videos. We have no manufacturing base. And because we have no manufacturing base, the tax base that the government relies on to operate is taxpayers, not corporations, because we barely tax large corporations. It's not the small business owners. They get taxed to death as it is, but the manufacturing sector doesn't exist. So Australia can't rely on that manufacturing sector to generate revenue. So it relies on getting more taxpayers. Bring the taxpayers to Australia. Bring them by the hundreds of thousands. That's the way the government's operating at the moment. They go, to be able to bolster this stupidly large government we have, we need to be bringing immigrants into the country who are willing to pay tax right now and are happy to do it. Now, that's fine if Australia had a whole bunch of housing to put everyone into. I'm not against immigration. I think Australia, like I said, Australia needs it. What I am against is bringing immigrants into the country for the sake of building the taxpayer base. And when the country clearly has no room for 500,000 immigrants a year, that's the long and short of it. And he's right. The government is covering this up. It's bad for business if people in media bring up the fact that Australia cannot take as many immigrants as the government is allowing into the country. And I know this sounds racist or whatever you want to call it, but it's not. It's being pragmatic. There is not enough housing for the amount of people that are entering Australia right now. It's you can call me whatever you want. It's the truth, right? And that has a lot to do with the rising rent prices. And subsequently, that has a lot to do with the rising house prices. Simple supply and demand.
Flavanols, the compounds found in cocoa that boast nitric oxide
let's
improve
give,
heart
let's
health
give
and
Moon a
regenerate
bit of a-
brain
bit of a
cells. Now, before you roll
heyday
your
here.
eyes, this isn't some woo-woo nonsense. Let's take a look at Harvard scientist Dr.
Let's-
William
let's
Lee, who actually
scroll forward a little
the
bit.
good stuff she needs, and it's only
Guys, if
20
you want the
calories.
coca,
It's really easy
make sure
to
to
just
click
mix
the
in
link.
with
I'll
your
leave it
coffee
in
or
the
protein
description.
shake. Cells out. Bureaucracy.
Here we go. All right, we're back on.
Yet none of these problems are actually unique to Australia. What's really made their housing market the worst in the world is their unique set of laws. Despite all the hits home ownership has taken over the past few decades in Australia, it never lost its popularity with investors. Mining might be the biggest industry, but finance is a close second, and over 60% of that money is locked up in residential mortgages and other housing investments. One of the biggest reasons for this is Australia's insane tax system that all
Ooh, I
but
can't
forces
wait to
people
talk
with
about
money
this.
to invest it into housing. For reference, their top tax rate for income is one of the highest in the world, 45% for everything over 180,000 Australian dollars. And this is a huge chunk of your income if you're an investor. Of course, there are a few simple ways to avoid this written into Australia's laws, and it's all designed to push investment into the housing market. One of these laws is called negative gearing.
Oh.
Investors in housing are allowed to
Negative gearing is the biggest rort to the Australian taxpayer. It really is. There is a whole bunch of people that own property in this country that can't even afford to have it, that can only have it based on an antiquated tax law that no other country really has. If you go to the United States, they don't have negative gearing. You go to any other modern developed country in the world, there's no such thing as negative gearing. It's like discretionary trusts in Australia. It's an old European law. It's an old European business structure that we inherited that we never gave up. And, the thing with negative gearing is that the genie's out of the bottle. They can't just unwind negative gearing. That's why in the last election, Albanese won, right? It was brought up as a play, got shat on, and that was it. But negative gearing, and hopefully Moon goes into explaining for those people that don't understand it, allows you to basically operate as a loss as a landlord and then still make money. It's absolutely ludicrous.
Deduct their housing losses from their income. So even if you make a risky purchase on housing, you'll always get money back from tax deductions, which all but guarantees a culture of wild speculation. Then there's the capital gains tax discount. If you hold property for over a year, then when you sell it, you only pay 50% of what you would have normally paid in capital gains tax. It simply makes housing a better investment than anything else. And it's this environment of a small collection of tightly packed cities with ever-rising housing markets that has made Australia so expensive to live in today, and has robbed the next generation.
Negative gearing is the equivalent of you losing money at a casino and them comping you a suite or them comping you a free meal. That's what negative gearing is like, as if it's one big casino game and they're just comping you to keep playing it. That's effectively what it is. So if you're a high roller and you have a lot of properties, you'll just get more comps. You'll just get more free stuff, but you're still losing money to the casino. That's what I don't like about negative gearing, is that it encourages people to gamble, basically, because with negative gearing, you're not making money from the rental yield. You have to get an appreciating asset. Your property has to go up in value or the Ponzi scheme falls over. If your property does not go up in value, then you're stuffed. If you're negatively gearing your property, I could understand if you were investing in property because it cost you $1,000 a month in your mortgage and all the other bits and pieces to have a property, and you were making $1,100 in rent, and you were netting $100. I completely understand that. That's a good investment. But when you rent a property, when you have $1,000 or $1,100 of expenses and you make $900 from it, it's not a good investment. And that's what I don't like about negative gearing. It's just a dumb investment that relies on tax loopholes to make financial sense.
Of any chance to gain a foothold in society. At this point, these laws and speculation have pushed the housing market so far that changing them would trigger a massive economic collapse.
Like I just
the
said.
bubble could burst and older Australian homeowners would lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity. And these are the people that are most likely to vote, so the government doesn't want them to lose all of their money. In general, neither party wants to trigger this collapse or be blamed for this whole thing falling apart, even if it would be good in the long run. Every year, it just gets so much worse and worse. Meanwhile, housing prices going up marginally benefits these large voting blocks and makes the very top of Australian society even richer. In fact, if you have serious money, then housing investments have been so much more lucrative than pretty much anything else for decades now. But it's all but paralyzed the rest of the economy, as investors don't care nearly as much about new business ideas or taking risks as in other developed countries.
This is the core of the problem, is that when you can make $100,000 in a year off property, why would you invest in a small business? Why would you produce anything? Why would you manufacture anything? It just doesn't produce a country that innovates. And I've talked about this in previous videos, and I got absolutely shut on for this. If you're going to make $100,000 by sinking money into a property, why would you start a small business? Why would you manufacture anything? Why would you invest money in your friends or family for them to pursue an idea? Why would you invest in anything else? Why would the government invest in anything else? It just doesn't make sense. And that's why Australia is lagging behind the rest of the developed world when it comes to innovation, because there's no incentive for anyone to invest any kind of money in innovation. Absolutely makes me sick.
If you're not able to mine it or live in it, they just don't care. Big companies that start in Australia pretty much always move out. Murdoch's News Corp began in Australia, of course, but quickly outgrew its home country. And if he had listened to Australian investment advice, he would have just put the entire thing back into the housing market. To bring it all back around, Australia's mineral wealth clearly hasn't been as detrimental to the nation as it was in the Congo, or really in most other developing nations, but it has given their investor class easy access to massive amounts of money, which has ended up ruining the housing market and the cost of living. And the worst part is that financialization has also taken away Australia's only way to quickly reverse this as well. They haven't just sold off the housing market, they sold off the other parts of the economy as well. But as long as Australia still controls the ground it's built on, they'll always have the means to prop up their economy. The problem is, they just aren't in control of that anymore. The government used to take direct control of its precious resources, making sure that domestic companies extracted them and that the profits of exporting these resources remained in Australia. It's a large part of what made them such an incredibly rich nation in the first place. Over the course of decades though, loosening government laws and foreign ownership have seen the country's mineral wealth rights fall out of their grip. Today, Australia's massive mining industry is nearly entirely foreign owned. The largest companies are the results of mergers with foreign companies or subsidiaries of foreign companies. BHP Group Limited is by far the largest, worth over 200 billion Australian dollars. American investors own 73% of it, and 7% of that is BlackRock's stake. Rio Tinto, the second largest, is also partially owned by BlackRock, as well as by Vanguard. However, the major shareholder there though is a Chinese corporation. A lot of the time, these companies pay little to no tax. Between 2020 and 2021, 32% of Australia's largest companies paid zero tax. Mining companies.
Doesn't it make you sick? Doesn't it make you sick to hear that? Not even about the tax. I think anyone that's minimizing taxes, everyone should be minimizing tax. But doesn't it make you sick that the only resource that we have that we really invest money into as a country is iron ore and coal and stuff we dig out of the ground, and we don't even own the companies that do that, right? So not only do we have no manufacturing base, no innovation base, because everyone's investing their money in property because it makes financial sense to do that, but the people that take one of the biggest exports in this country, take it out of the ground and so they can sell to China, those companies are 86% owned by someone else. How freaking ludicrous is that? Honestly, and you wonder why countries like Dubai and Saudi Arabia, and talk about Malaysia here. Malaysia is one of the wealthiest countries in Southeast Asia because in Miri, which is part of Malaysia, there is a nationally owned oil company called Petronas. It's owned by the Malaysian government. And because of that, fuel's heavily subsidized here. A lot of the profits go back into the country. 86% of the profits of these companies that are pulling millions and millions of tons of our resources as Australian citizens out of the ground goes overseas, and we get zero benefit from it because we pay no tax. Absolutely ludicrous.
Companies were some of the biggest offenders. Instead of paying billions in taxes, they pay hundreds of millions to lobbyists who pass some of that along to politicians. They keep this going and everyone gets rich, except the Australian people. It's all a corrupt system designed to be as opaque and complicated as possible. And the only way to see how truly messed up this is to compare it to countries that actually took control of their natural resources and gave at least some of this money back to the people. Between 2018 and 2019, Australia exported over 75 million tons of liquefied natural gas, and this took in around $600 million in tax revenue from the gas companies. Qatar exported a similar but slightly.
Alwyn, great question, mate. So Alwyn just brought up, isn't the Australian government interested in earning anything from its mining industry? No, this is the core problem. There's so many lobbyists that are paid to make it sound like a good idea. See, the problem with Australia is that we only think 3-4 years in advance. So you have the Albanese government in at the moment. Albanese's only and the party are only thinking about the next couple of years. They don't care what happens after that. So they're just trying to position themselves so they can get the next 4 years. They don't care about the long-term success or failure of this country. They don't care about the long-term success or failure of its population. They're just trying to stay in power. It's really quite sad because in the 70s, it wasn't like this. In the 70s, a lot of these companies were nationalized. It's such a sad state.
Larger amount of gas, but took in over $25 billion. However, Qatar is a much more authoritarian country, and so it makes sense that they could take greater control and extract more wealth from their resources. But what about developed nations? Denmark and Norway also have large supplies of oil and gas which they export. A researcher for the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies between 2008 and 2018 investigated this, and the results were shocking. If Australia had taxed these resources in the same way as these countries, it would have made between $70 and $80 billion in revenue, over twice what they actually made. More recent reports even indicate that.
And so instead of taxing these companies properly, they just go, oh, actually, we'll just bring more immigrants into the country and tax them. That is the cliff note of Australia right now. Let's not tax these companies that are exporting all of our natural resources to other countries. How about we just get more taxpayers into the country that we can't house and tax them? So instead of taxing these companies that should be taxed for taking the resources from our country and moving the benefits of those resources, the financial benefit of those resources overseas for minimal tax, they just tax us instead as Australian citizens. That's how stupidly ludicrous the current situation in Australia is, that everyone that defends the current status quo in Australia just doesn't understand how much richer. I don't talk about how Australia is a third world country. I don't say that lightly. What I'm trying to say is that you think about how much wealthier Australia would be as a country if it was governed properly, and it made better decisions in the lead up to the situation we're in now.
Over the past 4 years, the government failed to collect over 13 billion Australian dollars in natural gas royalties. Another part of the cost of living crisis is the price of energy going up, which is insane for a country that exports so much of it. Exports have boomed in recent years, but revenue not so much. That's money that could have built social housing and gone towards securing the Australian dream for generations to come. But instead, this money was taken out of the pockets of Australians and went straight into the accounts of the foreign shareholders who control these industries. Australia didn't sell its minerals, it sold its mineral rights, and now its people are paying the price for the short-sighted thinking. Other than the mining and finance industry built of funneling economic profit into housing, Australia's economy is pretty lackluster. There is another industry in which they do lead the world though: gambling. Per capita, Australians gamble the most money in the world, 25 billion Australian dollars a year, which is the equivalent to around 17 billion US.
Makes you super proud to be an Australian, doesn't it? When you hear that we're the 91st in the world for economic complexity, most of the mineral rights have been sold to other countries. Most of the tax that we should be getting as a country is just not charged to these companies, and they tax us instead. And hey, we do lead the world in something, that is gambling. What a freaking joke.
Because as it turns out, 38% of Australians gamble every week, and it's all because of the culture of slot machines. Referred to as pokies and fruities are pretty much everywhere in Australia. Along with separate casinos dedicated to them, nearly every single bar has its own slot machines. In the state of New South Wales, there are over 90,000 of them. Nevada, home to Las Vegas, has 120,000. So this is the perfect industry for a country full of old people with tons of money in real estate property. But as should be obvious by now, Australia's government has been laser focused on extracting as much wealth from its people in any way possible. Industries that have clearly tragic effects like gambling are protected so that they can grow. Meanwhile, others are taxed as much as possible. A pack of cigarettes costs between 50 and 70 Australian dollars, and Australia is the most expensive place to be a smoker in the world. While this is a good thing that it does reduce smoking, Australia has pretty much banned vapes and other smoking alternatives as well. You can only buy them in...
So Craig's brought up a good point here. Let's read this. So the latest budget is still pushing big immigration. So they'll keep printing money, keep pushing inflation, keep pumping the price up of everything. And the math doesn't make sense to live in Australia any longer. This is what people don't understand about why we left, right? We are just pragmatic people. Do I like being taxed 50% on my money? No. Does any Australian like being taxed 50% on the money? No. Do I agree that the government should be taxing people $50 to smoke a cigarette? No. Australia just goes, hey, we can either tax these big companies or we can tax the everyday Australian taxpayer. Which one will put up less of a fight? Oh, the Australian people will put up less of a fight. Let's tax them. And all it would take is more Australians to actually say, no, I'm sick of this. Stop. How about you tax these big companies and lobby harder than the lobbyists that these guys pay? And the voting population decides what these parties do. But Australians are so passive and timid and too busy gambling and too busy worrying about what's happening on Married at First Sight to actually care. That's the biggest problem with Australia right now, is that there's not enough people that actually care that we are getting bent over a barrel and raped as a population. We are basically they basically look at the Australian taxpayer and go, there's our dollar signs. That's our fun. We're just going to pluck the dollars out of these guys' heads and give it to foreign companies. Australia, where you can't. This is Australia, where we can't build a toaster, but we can bet the house on which one pops first. Yeah, it's sad. It's just sad, right? It's nothing except that. It's sad that doesn't matter how many people make videos like this, because this is a really well done video. This is a very moderate opinion piece. Maybe 200,000 people will watch it, when every Australian should be watching this. If every Australian was to watch this and consume this information, there would be riots on the freaking street because most Australians don't even realize what's happening to them. They go, oh, I can still afford my $20 avocado on toast, then everything should be okay. That's the way Australians think. Oh, I can still afford to put fuel in my XR8 Turbo, XR8 Falcon. Everything's okay. I can still afford to buy Netflix. Everything's okay. The problem is, at some point, it's not going to be okay. And then it's going to be too late. The transition's going to happen. There's going to be, the two-class system is going to be fully in effect. And unfortunately, it won't matter if you have a house or not. Everyone's just going to be poor.
Selected pharmacies. These measures are just one part of Australia's many nanostate policies, which seeks to control its people much more strictly than other developed nations, even going so far as to ban social media usage for people under 16.
Tonight, Australia taking an unprecedented step, becoming the first country in the world to ban the use of social media apps for anyone under the age of 16.
That's pretty huge.
Even mature themes in art, for example, are often punished and censored, and yet a rampant gambling industry is fine, although violent video games are often banned outright. All of this amounts to a country that has so much potential but has been undermined by its own government, and the next tragedy is for the next generation of Australians growing up today. Except for the lucky few due to inherit property, they nearly have no chance of ever getting on the ladder, and having what their parents or grandparents ever had. The rich resources and wealth of their country is owned by foreign companies and shareholders, and the housing market is so bloated that it's ruined the rest of the economy and made the cost of living unbearably expensive. The future should be bright, but at this rate, it could be decades before any real change ever happens.
Man, I really hope more Australians watch that. That is a very good take on the current situation of Australia. Now, it's more nuanced than that, obviously. But if you wanted a primer on what is wrong with Australia right now, that is a fantastic overview. It's not the Australian people that's the issue with this country, with Australia. It's not the Australian people, right? It's bad leadership. The country just has terrible leadership and has had a string of terrible leadership. And when you stack that many shit leaders on top of each other, you take a country that was one of the wealthiest in the world and you turn it basically into a developing country. Australia should not have the homeless epidemic it has. It shouldn't have families living in fucking cars. We are supposed to be a developed nation leading the world. Yet the only thing we lead the world in is in freaking gambling. And no one seems to care. Obviously, you guys do because you're watching this. Most Australians just simply don't care. And that's what's going to be the downfall of Australia. I talk about this a lot. Everyone thinks I just shit on Australia. And everyone's like, oh, why don't you do something about it? Why do you think I make these videos? Do you think I like being abused in the comments every single time I make a video? Do you think I like sitting there going, oh, you just hate Australia, considering I gave almost a decade of my life to the military of it? Do you think I like doing that? No. This is my way of contributing to making change in the way that I can. It may not be much, but it's better than what most Australians are doing, which is literally sitting around going, oh, it's okay. It'll be all right. The government will save us. If you take the previous 15, 20 years of the government's management of our country as a sign of what's to come, I would not be trusting the government to save us in this situation. And that's just being someone that's pragmatic. Because you look at how we got into this situation, and a lot of it's got to do with the government and nothing to do with the people, the everyday person. And unfortunately, that is just because the everyday person just doesn't care enough to do anything about it. And I know it's going to, nothing will change, unfortunately, just the way our government is designed will stop that from happening. Having a two-party system, we vote for parties. We don't vote for a prime minister. We vote for a party, as we've seen when I believe it was Julia Gillard got voted in when Kevin kicked Kevin Rudd out and voted Julia Rudd in. I believe that was it, man. We've had so many prime ministers now; it's hard to keep track of what that happened. But as much as Donald Trump's trade tariffs, I've spoken about that. I think they're a stupid idea, but at least people vote for a president there, and then the president can actually do things to affect change. I don't necessarily think Albanese is dumb enough to know what's dumb enough to really be sitting there doing this nefariously. I think he just has no say in what happens. It's the party that has a say. He's literally the figurehead. He is the thing they place on top of the pile that smiles and waves, but the actual decisions are made by the party. And within that party, within the political system in Australia, there's a huge amount of corruption that causes things like this. Someone knows someone else that knows this person, it gets pushed to the front, and all of a sudden there's a new law that social media is banned for people under the age of 16. It's like, of all the things that are wrong with Australia, they chose to put their flag on that and go, this will solve Australians' problems. Let's just not let 16-year-olds use social media. How about you ban them using gambling apps? That would be a good place to start, because there's plenty of 16-year-olds I know that are on sports bet, gambling, as much as there's rules to stop that. So instead of dealing with the actual problem with this country, they just make problems. They go, oh, actually, this is what the voters care about. The kids being stuck on computers. How about we just do this because it might keep some people happy, instead of taxing the companies that extract our resources. Most Aussies will only realize they're falling when they hear the sound of their heads hitting the floor. Yeah. It is. It's really that case, right? It'll be too late. Once the frog is fully boiled and dead, that's when we'll know that what happened to us. The history books will tell what happened to our country. The history books will say, oh, how Australia, my kids will grow up in their 20s going, oh, what happened to this country? Their kids are going to go, oh, wow, I remember when, my dad used to tell me how awesome Australia was. Now it's a shithole dystopian place like freaking, Argentina. It's or Sri Lanka or something like that. And I know that sounds far-fetched, but it's not actually. It's not actually that far-fetched. We're a good portion of the way there. Homelessness is increasing. Nowhere has anywhere to live. The cost of living is pushing people out of the country. We're part of the way there. Australian democracy, where you get to choose your smiling puppets sell you out slowly, as long as they don't upset the real bosses, Murdoch, Mining, and mateships with multinationals. Yeah, I mean, we can sit here and blame the multinational companies, but they're just doing what multinational companies do. Our government lets them do it. That's the problem, right? Our government lets them do it. And that's the core problem. That is the core problem. Bob Hawke listened to the party listened to Hawke. Yeah, I think, like I said, this wasn't the case. This hasn't always been the case, I should say. This is a recent phenomenon. This is a recent phenomenon in Australia. It's just the overstepping of the government in the wrong areas, fundamentally, right? But it's just sad. Like, I wanted to watch that video because I know Moon produces good content. And that, by the way, Moon, not that you ever watch this, but that was a fantastic video, by the way. Very engaging, very to the point. And it was a pleasure to sort of watch and talk over the top, because you're bang on with 99%. I would say this, though. Western Australia doesn't have many pokies because they're not allowed outside of the casinos. That is one good thing about living in Western Australia, is that if they had pokies in pubs in Western Australia, oh my God, the country would be broke, because all the people that are working up in the mines would be hitting those pokies like their lives depended on it. But sports betting is a real thing that just took the spot in WA. But yeah, it's a shame. Kind of depressed me a little bit watching that. I'm not going to lie, because I was having a pretty good morning until I thought about how bad Australia is actually getting. But it only takes people to stand up and go, I'm sick of this, for something to change. It's just, we need people to do that. And that's the missing bit of this formula. Everything else is in place. Yeah, thank you so much. I just share my thoughts. Like I said, I'm not going to run for government. I'm not a political commentator. I'm just another Australian that's just looking from the outside in now, admittedly, but I'm just another Australian. I contribute in the way I can, which is making content like this. Hopefully some Australians see this and go, wait a minute, it sucks that, these big multinational companies that don't get taxed. It sucks that, we get taxed to death to discount and to subsidize those guys. It just freaking sucks. But yeah, no one seems to care. But guys, I'm going to jump off. I've got some work to do. So thank you so much for watching. And of course, I'll catch you in the next video. If there's a video you guys want me to watch and comment on, and just watch, or an article, just leave it in the comments of this video, and I'll give it a watch.